Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf Kuf. It's the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started with the bottom of Tzadi Tet Amud Bet. Gid hanasheh shenit bashel. This takes us back to the Mishnah in daf Tzadi Vav Amud Bet, where we said if you cook a gid hanasheh with other gidim, if you could take it out, great. Okay, if you can't take it out, and then only if it imparted flavor, is it a problem? If you can't take it out, then they're all forbidden. To which the Gemara asks, Li batel beruba. Why isn't it batel berov? Now, why should it be batel berov? We've been talking all the time about ta'am and shishim and all that. Well, there's another category, which is called yavesh b'yavesh. If you have two items that are both dry, now the assumption is if they're both dry, then they don't really mix so much. So they're not really intermingled. They're just right next to each other. So if they're dry and dry, then we assume that we're actually going to say it's batel berov, because basically you're saying there's a pile of gidim here, let's say, okay, and this is the question on the Mishnah, it really should work this way. If you take any gid out, right, there's separate pieces that don't become intermingled. It's not like, right, milk that gets into meat and it's all over the place. But if they're not intermingled, you could just pull each one out, and each one you pull out, you say, oh, this came from the majority and it should be fine. Okay, the majority are gidim that are kshirim, sinews that are fine. So why don't we say that? To which the Gemara answers, Bria Shani. It's its own complete entity. It's called the Gid Hanasheh. It has its own complete identity. It's a whole thing. Okay? Normally we use that when we talk about bugs, right? Like a bug is in your food. It's a problem because it's a whole creature, even though you eat less than a kazayit. But this overrides things, and also they're not batel. That's the problem. Anything that's a bria has significance, and it's not nullified. Now the Gemara goes on to the next case in the Mishnah. If you have a piece of meat or non-kosher meat that died, meat that died, an animal that died on its own, or you have a piece of non-kosher fish that got mixed in with other pieces. So it's the same idea. Why is it batel berov? It's the exact same law as the gid. If you don't recognize it, then it's a problem, right? It's usher. So they say, why isn't it batel berov, right? The Mishnah said very clearly, right? Im lav kulam asurim, they're all forbidden. So why is that? So they say, well, now we're going to have to come up with, why is this also not batel? Because it should be. And now we're going to say this doesn't ever get nullified. Why not? Well, you can't say it's a bria. It's not. It's a slice of meat or a slice of fish. So hani chalamanda amar kol shadar kol limanot shaninu. There's a famous Mishnah in Orla, which has a big machloket about how to read it. And it's about items that don't get nullified. And one version is anything that kol shadar kol limanot, anything that it could be sold in number, meaning you sell 5 of them. Okay, when you go buy steak, you ask for 5 pieces of steak, or you ask for 10 pounds of steak. Okay, so you could ask for it in different ways. So that's called kol shadar kol limanot. Anything it could be sold in number isn't nullified. Now, if you read the Mishnah that way, then you can explain that's why this isn't nullified, because people buy steak by the piece. But ela lamanda, right? You don't usually buy it by the whole cow, right? But anyway, you might buy it though by weight. But ela lamanda amar etchedar kol limanot shaninu. But if you read that Mishnah as only items that, if you read it etchedar kol limanot, means only items that are exclusively sold by number. Now, meat is not exclusively sold by number. You don't always sell it as X number of pieces. You sometimes buy it by weight or sell it by weight. So if you say it like that, then it's actually not it's not one of those cases, the exceptions to the rule, where it's never nullified. It is nullified because it doesn't only get sold by number. So how do we explain then? So why would this not be nullified? So it works if we go with one version of that Mishnah, but it doesn't work with the other version. So to which they answer, Shani chaticha ho'il u'ruya litkabeh b'lifnei ha'orchim. This is something that's respectable to put on the table, right? It's exactly what I said. You're not going to put a whole cow on the table, but a piece of steak, everybody gets a piece of steak. That's something respectable. And therefore, one piece of steak that's nullified to other pieces, you can't just say, oh, that's nullified. It's got significance. Things of significance can't be nullified. Okay, now the Gemara has to just figure out, before we finish this section, why does it have both cases? Utsricha. Diashminan gi mishum debriyahi. If you had the gid, you would have said, okay, now we're just going to highlight what we said, but say each one is unique in that way. You might have said a gid is not nullified because it's a bria, because it's its own complete entity. Aval chatichaim alo, but you might not say the same thing for a slice of meat. And if you had the slice, you would have said, because that's something you would put on the table. Okay, you wouldn't put a gid on the table. It's not really a nice thing to be serving, and therefore maybe it is nullified. Because there's less significance if it doesn't have that. Aval gid, right? Emalo, you might say not the case. Therefore, it's tzricha. That's why you needed both of them, because each has its own unique reason why it's not nullified. Second section for today. Jarish Rabba Bar Bar Chana. חתיכה של נבלה ושל דג טמא אינה אוסרת עד שתיתן טעם ברוטב ובקפה ובחתיכות. If you have a piece of nevela or a fish and it's cooked up in a pot with other things, how do you estimate what it's nullified against? So you add up together all the other kosher things that are in the pot, pieces of meat or fish, and the sauce and the kifa, which is the stuff stuck at the bottom, right, that gets stuck to the bottom. Now, everything goes against it. Okay, this looks pretty simple, but you have to understand there's two things that Rav Bar Bar Chana is saying, and Rav is going to go against both of them. Number one, he thinks, well, let's talk about the main thing he thinks. He thinks that min b'mino is bata, okay, because he says meat is nullified to meat. Okay, so he doesn't know like Rabbi Yehuda, that's for sure, who thinks the two similar items that get mixed are not nullified at all. Secondly, he says that this one piece of meat gives taste equally throughout the entire pot. And that's why everything in the pot is considered up against the meat. Okay? Okay, Rav and Mora ale udarash. When Rav heard this, he put up an amora, that's usually their loudspeaker, somebody to announce what Rav wants to say to everybody, which is, what he wanted to say is, kevan shenatan tam b'chaticha. We're now going to have a very big halacha in kashrut. Now, if this piece of meat was up against another piece and imparted flavor to that piece. Let's say there were two pieces of meat in the pot, and the meat now imparts, let's say there's not shishim against, and that meat imparts flavor to another piece of meat that it was right up against. Now, once it does that, and it gives flavor into the other meat, and the other meat, which is kosher, absorbs the taste, chaticha atzma na'aseh nevela. Okay, this is what we call chaticha na'aseh nevela. The chaticha that was next to it, that swallowed, absorbed some of the flavor of the non-kosher meat, now itself becomes a nevela. Okay, it wasn't a nevela. A nevela is unslaughtered meat. That was the first piece. But the second piece now has the exact same status. This basically is saying a lot of things here. Rav number one says against Rav Bar Bar Chana, min b'mino is not batel. We hold like Rabbi Yehuda, he says. This second piece of meat is not nullified to the first piece, and therefore, right, you can't just ignore, right? Now, that means that these two, we're going to see, he says it. This actually, he didn't say the min b'mino part yet. Sorry, my mistake. We didn't get to bitul yet. That was one piece and one piece. Ve'oseret kol ha'chatichot kulam mipnei shehem mina. Now what he says is the following. If that piece, okay, we have piece one and piece two. Piece one was the non-kosher. It was up against piece two in a pot. Made it forbidden because there wasn't enough, right, against them. Now, there wasn't enough of heter. If now we take that piece number two, or we take both pieces, one and two, and they end up in a pot with lots of other pieces of meat, the two of them together are both forbidden. Because we said the chaticha na'aseh nevela, now what happens? Oseret kol ha'chatichot kulan. They now forbid all the other chatichot mipnei shehein mina, because they're the same type. And min b'mino isn't batel. So if they end up with lots of other pieces of meat, they're all going to be forbidden now. Okay? And if there ends up with sauce and all that and things that are different type that could nullify the meat, it's going to have to nullify it up against both pieces of meat. The number one and number two, because number two already became a nevela. It is considered, even though, right, if we take, let's say it's 2 pounds, each steak is a pound. So how much isser is in this pot? 1 pound. But in the end, you're going to need 60 against the 2 pounds, because meat number two absorbed flavor from meat number one and is now itself forbidden. Okay? It's like a nevela, to the extent that now you need 2 times 2. You need 60 times 2 pounds to get rid of the flavor here, right? If you want to say that, let's say there's rotev, there's sauce, that's 60 times, it has to be 60 times both pieces and not 60 times one piece. It's a fascinating halacha, because altogether there's only X amount of isser. But since that second piece absorbed flavor, it itself turns into a forbidden item completely. That's a very radical halacha, but it's become halacha. Chaticha na'aseh nevela. Okay, so now let's see what happens. Amar le Rav Safra la Abaye. Okay, Michti Rav. Okay, the truth is I'm not passing halacha l'maaseh. I'm just saying that Rav said this. Okay, and Rav made a big deal about this. Now, Amar le Rav Safra la Abaye. Michti Rav kiman Amar l'shmate ki Rabbi Yehuda. Ta'amar min b'mino lo batil. So now Rav Safra comes out and says, I don't understand what's going on here because Rav obviously made a statement according to Rabbi Yehuda, who holds min b'mino lo batil. Now, according to him, my area ki natan tam, afilu ki lo natan tam nami. Even, why did it say if meat number one gives flavor to meat number two? If we say min b'mino is not batel, then it doesn't even have to impart flavor to meat number two. Meat number two is going to be forbidden because it's together with meat number one, right? You don't need this giving flavor. Even if it didn't give flavor, it should be forbidden. So Amarle, so now the answer, hacha b'mayaskinan. Right. And not only that, but even if it didn't give flavor, let me just say it this way. Even if it didn't give flavor, right? Didn't give taste, we anyway are with, we have meat number one with meat number two, and then we end up with other pieces of meat as well. Since it's all meat and meat, it shouldn't be batel at all. So what's the difference if meat number one imparts flavor to meat number two or not? It makes no difference. All the other pieces that we now add to the pot are going to be forbidden because of min b'mino. And min b'mino, two of the same types are not nullified. So we're going to have two answers to this. Abaye answers, when Rav Safra asked him, he answers the following. And then Rav is going to give a different answer. We're talking about a case where meat number one is no longer in the picture. In other words, we had a pot with meat number one and meat number two, nevela and not nevela. Second piece became a nevela because piece one gave it, right, imparted flavor to it. Now we took out the nevela, and all you're left with is the chaticha shenaseh nevela, the piece that became a nevela. Well, if that piece does, and then we added all these other pieces of meat. Now, that piece of meat is going to forbid all the other pieces because of min b'mino. But it's only going to forbid them now, even though we said that now it became an avela and it's considered a completely forbidden item, but it's not going to be able to forbid other pieces of meat if it didn't even get flavor from the problematic meat in the first place. So we neutralize the problem here that Rav Safra asked by basically explaining the case that we must be talking about a case where meat number one is no longer in the picture. And then the only way meat number two on its own can forbid something is going to be if it took flavor from meat number one, then it's going to be able to forbid other pieces. Rav is going to say, no, you don't even have to say this, turning out on a bet. Even if you didn't take the piece out, the first piece. Now remember, you have a pot with meat cooking. Whenever you cook meat in a pot, there's going to be sauce in it. Okay? So this isn't a classic case of min b'mino. Min b'mino is two pieces, right, of solid things next to each other, the exact same thing. Here, there's a third element in here. There's liquid, okay? There's gravy. So this is a case of min b'mino v'davar acher. Now, when you have min b'mino, meat, and sauce, kol min u'mino v'davar acher, the way it usually works with a min b'mino and a third item, salek mino kamisha eno, we've learned this before, we look at the similar item as if it's not there. So meat number two, we're going to look at it as if it's not there. And then we say, she'eno mino rava lavu mivatlo. If we have a lot of sauce in this pot, theoretically the sauce can overpower the isser in meat number one, if we have enough of it, okay? So even if we didn't take it out, if it didn't impart taste to that other piece, then we would have said, oh, well, we can have the sauce take over the meat, okay? But it would just be connected to Isur. But because it gave taste, now we have to assess the amount of sauce against both pieces, because now that second piece already absorbed flavor, and because of that, you're gonna need shishim against both of them, okay, of the sauce. So we had two explanations as to how this worked. Before we go on to part two of the daf, since we're starting from New Mishnah, I'll summarize part one. This will be our summary for this part. So we started with the gid and asher, that's with other gidim, right? Sinews that are kosher. And then we have the meat that was with other pieces of meat. And we said, why is each of them not nullified in majority? We say in the Mishnah, it's a problem. If you can't take it out and identify it, you can't eat any of them when really it should be min b'mino because it's yavesh and yavesh, dry and dry, and it should work. But, right, it should be Batel Berov. It's not because each one had their own reason. Either it's a Bria, it's its own entire entity, or it's something that you would put on the table. It's respectful. Therefore, it's not nullified. Then we got to this Rabbi Bar Rav Chana who said, chaticha of nevela or not kosher meat, that you basically figure out, you take everything else in the pot, including all the other pieces of meat, including even the piece of meat that was right next to it that maybe absorbed a lot of flavor. Everything goes against that one piece, just that one piece is forbidden. Rav said, what are you talking about? First of all, min b'mino isn't nullified, and that second piece of meat got flavor from the first. Now you're going to have everything against those two pieces, okay? And if that piece of meat, right, is separate, it falls into a pot with other pieces, that piece could forbid other things, right? And because min b'mino, it'll be a problem, it'll forbid all the chatichot because we don't allow it, but min b'mino is in bata. Okay, so they disagreed about two issues. And then we said, well, why does it actually need to impart flavor? Because Rav said only if that second piece got flavor, and then we had the two opinions of Rava and Abaye. Okay, now we move to the next Mishnah. The whole halacha of Gid and Asher, noheg b'tehora, ve'eno noheg b'tme'ah. I'll start by preface this by saying we're going to use tum'ah and tahara in two different ways today, just to confuse you. Torah and tme'ah here means kosher, not kosher, but it could mean pure and impure, which we're going to get to. In English, it's much easier to explain the difference. Okay, so I mean, you could explain in Hebrew too, but one of them you define by tum'ah and tahara, and one is kasher and not kasher. But in English, it's a little easier. You say either it's pure and impure or kosher, not kosher. So noheg b'torah ve'eno noheg b'tme'ah. The law of Gid and Asher is only in kosher animals, not in non-kosher animals. Rabbi Yehuda Omer af b'tme'ah. Rabbi Yehuda says even in non-kosher animals, it's forbidden to eat the Gid and Asher. You eat the Gid and Asher, you're going to get lashes for eating a non-kosher animal, and you're going to get lashes for eating the Gid and Asher. I'm a Rabbi Yehuda. How do I know this? Halomi b'nei Yaakov ne'asar Gid and Asher. Because the sons of Yaakov were already forbidden to eat the Gid and Asher. V'adayin be'emat me'ah muteret lahem. But when they were forbidden to eat the Gid and Asher, they weren't forbidden yet to eat non-kosher meat. So what do you see here? The Gid and Asher came before, which later we're going to understand this to mean. I hate to give away the punchline early, but the whole issue of today, from here to the end of the daf, is this concept of ein isur chal al isur. If something is already forbidden, you can't add another prohibition onto it. So if meat is already forbidden because you can't eat non-kosher meat, then you can't add on, and you also can't eat the Gid and Asher because it's forbidden mainly because it's not kosher, not because of the Gid and Asher. But Rabbi Yehuda thinks that since the Gid and Asher came first and was forbidden before they even were forbidden to eat non-kosher meat, first of all, it shows that they were forbidden to eat non-kosher meat. The Gid and Asher was a commandment even for non-kosher meat. But a little more so, when we get to the end of the sugya, we're going to say there's a bunch of exceptions for ein isur chal al isur that you can't add another prohibition to something that's already prohibited. And one of them is if it's more stringent. And what they basically want to say is the fact that this was the first commandment commanded to them before even they had any prohibition on eating anything, that shows it was very severe. Okay, that they couldn't eat this in any animal at all. Okay, before they even got not kosher. And therefore, we're going to say this applies even to non-kosher animals. Okay? Amrulo, the rabbi said, what are you talking about? That's not true. This was actually given to them only at Sinai. Yes, it mentions it in Bereshit, but it's just making reference to it so that when they get the Torah, right, they know where this goes back to. And it was put in the place where the incident happened. But of course, it's forbidden only from the time the Torah was given, in which case your theory goes out the window, they say to him. So here's a big machloka, which we made reference to a little while ago, a few dapim ago, about was this forbidden before they even had the mitzvot? And theoretically, then you'd say B'nai Noach are commanded to do this, right? Because it was for the Jews before they got the Torah, then it would really be for everyone. Or was it really only for the Jews and given at Sinai? And then that affects whether it's going to be effective on non-kosher animals or not. So now the Gemara is going to have a whole big problem here. V'savar Rabbi Yehuda isur chal isur. How could Rabbi Yehuda say this? Isur chal al isur. Okay, now remember, forget that I told you the answer, which is it's more stringent, because now we're going to go through a whole bunch of attempts to try to figure out how does Rabbi Yehuda forbid this. So first we're going to say maybe he holds isur chal al isur, but no way he holds that way because, right, that you could have a prohibition that is applicable to another prohibition. Okay, once something's prohibited, you can prohibit something else. Because look at this braita. V'hatanya, it says in a braita, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Okay, this could be a little convoluted, so bear with me. You might have thought, okay, remember there's this unique, now we're talking about tuma as tuma. We're going to use the word tameh in the same sentence, one to mean not kosher and one to mean impurity. So don't get confused. Now, if you have a kosher bird, only a kosher bird, and while you're eating that kosher bird, there's a unique type of impurity. While it's in your mouth, it's going to make you tameh. Okay, not if you touch it, but if you eat it, it makes you impure, and then the clothes you're wearing are impure as well. Now, this is only true for a kosher bird, and that's what the Breita asks. Rabbi Yehuda asks in the Breita. You might have thought of tameh. You might have thought a non-kosher bird would be metame begadim bebeit habliya, would make your clothes impure as you're swallowing them. Okay, maybe that would pass on impurity also. Talmud Lamal, no, we know it's not, and this is the key. It's not the din of nevela of tahor, or tameh, which interests us. It's how we learn it. This is going to be what's important. Nevela utrefa lo yochal litam'aba. Don't eat a nevela or a treifa in order to make you impure. Okay, this is very confusing. Pasuk, what exactly it means. There seems to be a prohibition to eat a nevela or a treifa, which we know, and there's actually other pasukim about it. So the drasha in the Sifra, which is the Midrash Halacha Am Vayikra, also called Torah Kohanim, Rashi quotes it, says that this pasuk is talking about a nevelat oaf. It's not talking about other things. It's talking about the nevelat oaf, and because it says lo yochal tamabad, that's how we get the whole thing about swallowing it. That while you're eating it, it's mitame, okay? And it's telling you don't eat that nevela. Now, what nevela is it referring to? Well, it's mishi isuro, and as which nevela creates this impurity that while you're eating it, it makes you impure? Only things that are forbidden to eat because of nevela. I mean, mishi isu, because it said nevelu treifa, don't eat. And then it says, and if you eat it, l'tamabah, will make you impure. But listen, mishi isuro mishum bal yochal nevela. Now, again, it's when do you get that impurity? I didn't stress this. I said in Hebrew, but I didn't stress it in English. It's when you're eating a kosher bird, but the dead carcass of a kosher bird, not a kosher bird that was slaughtered properly, a kosher bird that was slaughtered improperly. So when you eat a kosher bird slaughtered improperly, it's going to pass on this impurity. If you eat a non-kosher bird slaughtered improperly, it won't pass on the impurity. How do they get that? From the following. The pasuk is saying, don't eat a nevela or a treifa, right? And if you do, it will make this impurity of the swallowing. But it's only someone who you're not allowed to eat it because it's a nevela, as opposed to, I'm going to tell you outside first and then we'll read it inside, as opposed to something you can't eat because it's not kosher. Okay? So, mishi suro mishum bal tochal nevela. It's only someone something you can't eat because it's a nevela, because it died on its own and you didn't slaughter it. But yatsa zeh she'ein suro mishum bal yochal nevela, ela mishum bal tochal tme'ah. But we're excluding from this someone who is not the problem because it's a nevela, even though it isn't a nevela, but a bird that dies on its own that wasn't kosher to begin with is a problem because lo tochal tme'ah. Now remember, here tme'ah means not kosher. Don't eat not kosher. Now, what do you see here? If you say that the don't eat nevela doesn't apply to non-kosher birds here, right? And this whole halacha of nevela of tahor doesn't apply to nevela of tameh, it's because ain isur chalal isur. It's only talking about things that are forbidden because you can't eat a nevela. But now, of course, you can't eat a nevela of a non-kosher bird. But you can't eat a non-kosher bird because it's not kosher, not because it's a nevela, and therefore the pasuk isn't referring to that. From this, you see, it's just sort of what's underlying the logic here, that ein isur chalal isur, and this was Rabbi Yehuda's words. So, right, the reason they exclude the non-kosher bird is because it's forbidden because of not kosher, and it's not forbidden because of nevela. So that's because ein isur chalal isur. You can't add another prohibition if it was already forbidden because it wasn't kosher. Then later, when it dies on its own, it's not forbidden because it's a nevela. What we see from here is that we tried to say that Rabbi Yehuda might hold that isur chalal isur, and that's why he says the gid and sheh is relevant also in non-kosher animals, but we can't say that because ein isur chalal isur, according to Rabbi Yehuda, as we learn from the fact that this pasuk about the nevelat of tahor can't possibly be talking about a non-kosher bird, because a non-kosher bird is only forbidden because of non-kosher and not because of nevela. So we're going to have a second attempt. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda holds that gidim don't have taste. Now, if they don't have taste, what does that help us? Well, b'tmei nami isur gid ika isur tumaleka. So now we're going to say And in a non-kosher bird, a non-kosher animal, we're going to say it's only forbidden to eat the gid. There is no isur halal isur because let's just think about this, if the gid has no taste, then when you are prohibited from eating a non-kosher animal, you're prohibited from eating the things that have taste, the meat. You're not prohibited from eating the gid and asher. Comes the Isser of Gid and Asher and says, oh, by the way, because of Gid and Asher, you're also forbidden to eat Gid and Asher. And that would be a perfect answer to Rabbi Yehuda. What's the problem? Well, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold in Gidim and no time. He thinks Gidim do impart flavor. How do we know that? We're going to see right now. V'sava Rabbi Yehuda in Gidim and no tam. Does he really hold that? V'hatanya, it says in a Braita, ha'ochel Gid and Asher shall be'emat me'ah. Rabbi Yehuda Machayev Shtayim. If you eat the Gid and Asher of a non-kosher animal, you're chayav 2. Why? You get lashes twice. One for eating not kosher, one for eating gid and asher. So obviously he thinks that you're forbidden because of the isur of gid and asher. This makes it also pretty clear that he thinks there's 2 isurim here, 2 prohibitions, and then isur halal isur. We're going to have to explain it still. For Rabbi Shimon poter, okay, Rabbi Shimon doesn't think so, but that's not really relevant for us. So they say, fine. So he clearly holds it does have flavor, does impart taste, which means what? That we're going to now have to come up with, we just saw from the fact that he says I have 2 sets of lashes. You're going to get, it's obvious he thinks Isur Chal Isur, so we're going to have to go with another method, which is to say there are exceptions to the Ein Isur Chal Isur rule. So let's try some exceptions. Maybe he holds Kasavar Noheg B'Shlil. Maybe he thinks the Gid and Asher is relevant in an embryo. And then why would that help us? The Isur Gid, the Isur Tuma Bahade Adade Ka'ati. We saw this in the sugya earlier, about a week ago, that the Gid and the Tuma all happen at the same time. Now, if that happens, remember, Ein Isur Chal Isur, if something's already prohibited, you can't add another prohibition. But if both of them happen as soon as the fetus, the embryo is created at that moment, and they both Isurim happen at the exact same time, then we resolve our problem. That both, you can't say one doesn't apply to the other. They both happen at the same time. You could have 2 prohibitions. Well, what's the problem? With Mimatzit Amrit, we're going to have a few problems. Mimatzit Amrit Noheg B'Shlil. First of all, we know he doesn't say that because what's the Mishnah? Ba'atznan Noheg B'Shlil. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Eino Noheg B'Shlil. Remember this Mishnah? Okay, this is on. No, it's not Peitet Amud Bet, was it? Oh, maybe no. It wasn't just one daf ago, but right, Peitet. It was on Peitet Amud Bet. It said there. Noheg b'shlil, and Rabbi Yehuda says it's not noheg b'shlil. Mechabo mutar, and its chaylev is permitted. Anyway, he says gid and asher is not noheg in an embryo. So they say, no, maybe you say like this. Maybe when he said it's not noheg b'shlil, hani mile gabe tahora. Okay, maybe that's only a kosher animal. Meaning, in a non-kosher animal, it would be in a shlil. Now, why would we distinguish? Well, the Rachmana amal kol b'be'emat tochelu. How do we know that it's noheg b'shlil? Because it says it's not noheg b'shlil, meaning you can eat the gid and asher b'shlil. Because of this pasuk that says any behema, which by the way the continuation is that has split hooves and chews its cud, is kosher, and you can eat it. The tochelu is at the end of that pasuk. Kol behema is at the beginning of the pasuk. Tochelu is at the end of the pasuk. It's coming to call everything in the behema. They're saying even the gid and asher, an embryo, is kosher. Now, that's obviously only in a kosher animal, which means if it's in not noheg b'shlil, there's no prohibition in the shlil. Only once it's born, that's only in kosher animals. Maybe the prohibition for non-kosher animals, though, which is not where this drasha comes from. This drasha is not talking about non-kosher animals. Aval b'tmeah and non-kosher animals, maybe it's noheg, maybe it was already in utero, it was forbidden. And then it all happened at the same time. But remember, we had a problem with this when we saw this figure earlier. Can you say that both happened at the same time? That's none. It says in the Mishnah. Right? These are the tumot the Nazir has to shave for, meaning if the Nazir became impure, he has to start his Nazirut all over again. On a mate, if he got impure to a dead body, or kizayit min a mate, right? Or an olive bulk of the mate. Why would it say on a whole dead body if it already said on a kazayit of a dead body, right? You don't need both. So I'm Rabbi Yochanan, lo nischa ela lenefel shalom nitkashu evarad bigidim. What it must be referring to is a baby that never really made it, and that hadn't even had the sinews form to tie the limbs together, which means that when it's in utero and there's right, this is if an entire whole baby died, but it was so small, it wasn't even a kazayit or something like that, or you have a kazayit of, right, that body. So this is a stage where it's so early that it hasn't even been fully formed. Maybe it's even bigger, but the point is it's not even a fully formed body, but it will be passed on in purity. And this is at a stage where the sinews haven't formed yet. Now, what do you see here? You see here that first there's flesh and later the sinews come, which means that the prohibitions don't come at the same time anyway, which leads us back to, okay, now we're still at a problem of Enis Rochalis, or even if you say the Rabbi Yehuda said about the Shlil is only about the kosher animals and non-kosher animals, maybe it would be forbidden in a fetus, in an embryo, it still wouldn't work here. So then they say, right, so it must be Isur Truma comes first, and then it's a problem. So now they answer. Finally, we're getting to our answer, which I already kind of told you when we read the Mishnah. Even though the Isur Truma came first it was not kosher, then we had the prohibition of Gid and Asher, but it's still going to be a problem, because it's a more severe prohibition that is it applies even to non-Jews and to the Jews before they got the Torah, and because of that, it shows its severity. It's going to apply even though, right? So something stronger can apply on another prohibition, a stronger prohibition. And Daikanami Katana, you can further prove this from the language of the Mishnah, which, as I told you when we read it, and with this we'll finish, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Va'alomi b'nei Noach ne'asal gidan b'nei Yaakov ne'asal gidan asher, right? To the sons of Yaakov already it was forbidden, V'adayin be'emat mu'am muteret, but they were eating non-kosher animals at the time. Obviously, it must be that this is a more serious offense, and therefore it can apply. And that was our whole long thing to explain why Rabbi Yehuda says it applies also to non-kosher when we have Isur Chalal, Isur prohibition, another prohibition, which Rabbi Yehuda clearly holds. And we had all sorts of attempts to try to figure out until we ended with it's just more stringent. And because of that, it has room to apply. And with that, we finish for today, wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom.